Greetings, everybody. This is Tyrone Brooks here from the ABCA. We have a great opportunity today and throughout the course of this time to connect about an area which has been something that a lot of our members have been really thinking about, have thoughts on it. At the most recent convention in Columbus, Ohio, we had a chance to a little bit talk about this area, just getting the pulse of our members. And it was talking about mental health and mental performance and how that has a role both affecting our athletes that we are involved in coaching and also just our as staff members. So we are very fortunate today to have the opportunity to connect with a number of professionals who are in the mental health space, who are going to give us an opportunity to connect further with them and also provide some really great insight on what they see at various levels that they're all working in. So really excited to have this group of folks that are going to have a chance to connect with us. We're going to start with Jadyn Lewis. She is a licensed clinical social worker at the University of Missouri, and she has a great opportunity to impact athletes there at the university. So we're really excited to have her here to start with. Jadyn, can you talk a little bit about for our audience here, an idea about your background and your work that you've been involved with there at the University of Missouri?
Sure. Yes, I'm so grateful to be here. Like he said, my name is Jadyn Lewis. I'm a clinical sports social worker here at the University of Missouri. I've been here about 3 years. I am a retired Division I athlete. I competed at Arkansas State University, where I got both my bachelor's and master's degree in social work. Started my career around Jonesboro in intensive community outreach, kind of high acuity cases, crisis intervention care. That was well integrated into coming here and specializing in behavioral therapy, as well as crisis intervention care for our students. And I'm currently in pursuit of my certified mental performance consulting license to just kind of make that holistic change or connection more so with mental health and performance.
No, that's wonderful. And again, thank you for just taking the time to do this.
Absolutely.
You look at now within the industry itself, mental performance is a growing field, throughout the industry. And you look at just the increased pressures for athletes to perform at all levels, whether professional, college, and within the youth sports space. Can you discuss a little bit kind of what the current state of this entire process now, how the importance of now mental health is really something that's a really more focal opportunity, and kind of what this kind of looks like as far as individuals really trying to prioritize, the mental health and also just mental performance throughout our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now we are asking a lot from still students. We're still, the population that we're dealing with hasn't changed. We're still dealing with high school kids, college kids that are now becoming young adults. But we're asking more of them with the amount of pressures that are at hand. Even when I was a student athlete, which wasn't that long ago, but it was some time ago, there wasn't the NIL. There wasn't as big of an opportunity to be able to transfer and have to adjust and change. So I think even more so now, being able to differentiate between what is a mental skill and being able to sharpen that. And then also, how can I prioritize my mental health and well-being? Because though they intersect, they are different. So just as important as our physical skills are, if we're able to sharpen our mental skills, we may be able to more easily access those physical skills and have some more efficient decision-making and what have you on the skill side. Whereas, our mental health issues, maybe we're coming into college and we're dealing with adjustment to a new environment or a divorce with a parent. That's completely separate than what you're dealing with on the field, even though it might also impact what's going on the field or the court. So.
No. Another area that I think we sometimes even sort of lose sight of is our coaches, and them individually, and that's where our coaches are under more scrutiny and pressure more than ever now at this stage, and many of our ABCA members are deep into the coaching space, having a chance to work with athletes all throughout. What advice do you have for coaches that can help them as far as really facilitating them to prioritize their own mental health? We really feel like that's something that has to be really looked at.
Absolutely. Just even in the concept of leadership, obviously what you do and how you do it trickles down to who you're leading. And I tell the coaches here, just as I tell my students, that rest is not a luxury, it's a necessity. So if it's, oh, I don't have time for it, then that will come with a cost. So whatever that rest looks like, I know that there's always going to be a get ahead mindset. How can I get ahead of the next team, of the next program, of the next season? But if we're not intentionally cultivating an opportunity for you to rest, that presents an opportunity for burnout and stress, and whoever you're leading will see that. So if we can change that kind of mindset, that rest is something that, once I make it to this point, I get to do, instead of something, this is what I have to do to get to X and Y and Z. I think we'll see a lot healthier of an environment with athletics on all levels.
Okay. Yeah. And obviously it's just huge that we make sure that we prioritize ourselves and make sure we bring our best selves to any process,
For sure.
When you look at the mental performance space, can you just discuss some of the misconceptions that may be out there that are often maybe even correlated with mental performance?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I hear is mental toughness behind the lens of removing the emotional process with sports. And I tell my students that I'm not looking to completely eradicate your anxiety or your anger or your disappointment. If you're putting this much into your sport, you should be disappointed if we're not meeting those goals. But how we regulate is separate from that. It's not about removing that. It's about increasing consistency and execution and optimizing performance. So I think just kind of not necessarily eradicating the emotional process, but just emphasizing what toughness truly means. And recognizing how that fits in.
No. Your experiences, you've been involved now in this college space, and obviously it's a unique opportunity to impact student athletes, day in and day out. Can you discuss how mental performance can be really incorporated successfully into the culture of assisting athletes, each and every day, and what that process really entails?
Yeah. So every institution has a different way of how they've integrated mental performance. We here at the University of Missouri, we have multiple contracted certified mental performance consultants. That way we're giving our coaches an opportunity to have some flexibility with how they integrate that into their programs with the different skills that may be impacting one student or maybe the whole team, because they can do different group work as well as individual work. That also helps us in the mental health space stay and be able to, better have individualized care for our students. We're confidential, we're out of the way. Students have to come to us, whereas mental performance is kind of going out. The students see their coaches talking to these mental performance consultants, and the question comes oh, are they telling my business? We don't want that to be confused in the process. We want them to be able, like I mentioned before, if we're going through something, working through a divorce, working through a breakup, working through class stuff, maybe ADHD, OCD, what have you, that is mental health. We want the skills to be able to be talked about. If you have the yips, your coach is going to know that. So maybe he needs to be up on, hey, how is this going on the mental side, so that we can more easily access the physical skill side. So here, having that difference, even though, again, they intersect, truly helps the buy-in overall with, hey, these are my sports skills and these are my mental holistic wellness skills that I need to work on.
No, wonderful. Just most recently, throughout this most recent college basketball season, Lauren Betts, who of UCLA, who was taken fourth overall by the Washington Mystics in the most recent WNBA draft, she was very outspoken about her own mental health and her journey that she went on, some of her personal struggles. Can you speak a little bit about the current culture of college sports and how it's made it extremely important for college students to really have an idea of a grasp of their own self-identity, and with that personal courage they need to make sure, hey, I'm to not be afraid to show that and be vulnerable at different times. Can you talk a bit about that space and kind of what you see there in the environment that you're involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more now than ever, we're at an all-time high for the opportunity for a student to assume scrutiny and pressure, whether that's good stress or poor stress. And with that, and our students having to be their own brand and represent themselves and not just a team, that presents an opportunity for their voices to be heard. And I am so proud with how we're moving within college athletics to have students like Lauren Betts that aren't afraid to speak on how vulnerability is strength. We're changing that language. We're changing that dynamic. I think it's counterintuitive to deny weakness in its existence, because then we're not being honest about what we need to work on or work towards, if we're not acknowledging where our limitations may lie. And I think, especially in the world of athletics, we think that speaking on maybe negative circumstances makes you a negative person, when being honest about circumstances and where we need to come from is probably the strongest thing that we can do in that time, because that would then give us an opportunity to get the help that we need and is necessary. So I think that the pressures are increasing, but the stigma is decreasing in a way of having people like her talk and having a stage to be able to speak on things like this. So.
I appreciate you just making such an effort to talk about this very important topic as we move forward and try to help individuals as they try to take the next steps, in their careers, and obviously at all different levels, what we deal with within baseball here at the ABCA. Any final words you would like to share? Any other nuggets or anything you would just like to talk about for the work that you do and how this has been such impactful work for yourself? Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would just say continue the conversations. We may not know the level of impact that we're going to have. I'm sure Lauren Betts didn't know that we would be talking about this on this call, but she would be grateful to know that. So if you have an opportunity to speak life, or to take a moment and check on someone and be intentional and re-emphasize furthermore, as we're moving more towards a business, younger and younger, there's more business expectations for students, for children, for kids. If we can humanize that for them, we're helping. We're taking a step in the right direction, because that's all we can do.
Well, Jadyn, thank you so much for taking time to do this. Really appreciate you doing this. Really looking forward to seeing how this final product will be. But again, you had some great nuggets there that I think are going to be very helpful with everybody. So thank you for doing this. Truly appreciate you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Travis Snider, we're glad to have you here with us, Travis. You are the CEO of 3A Athletics. Can you talk a little bit about with our audience here, give them an idea about your background and kind of the space you're involved with with your company?
Yeah, so after 16 years of playing professionally and a very successful youth baseball and football career, I went through a pretty intense identity crisis of who I was outside of being the athlete. Realized a lot of that identity formation took place in my younger years, my younger developmental years. And as I was going through my own therapeutic journey of unpacking a lot of these things that I experienced in my career, both amateur and as a professional, the fire inside of me, the impact that I wanted to make on my community goes far beyond how to hit a baseball and how to throw it. It's focused on helping support parents and coaches and leadership, as well as kids, through education on how our brains and bodies develop as we're going through youth sports, and how the adults set the environment right for kids to develop a healthy relationship with success and failure. So we really focus on parent education, coach education, and working with leadership teams to help identify where core values within an organization are really showing up, or where they're maybe not, and how the communication and expectations are really key, right, to having a healthy, functioning organization and culture. So our goal is to impact, as many lives as possible in the parent-child, as well as the coach-child and leadership space within youth sports.
Mental performance has been, it's a growing area throughout our entire industry. You look around and you see it at different levels. It looks like just the pressures are increased at no matter what level you're playing at, whether it's professional, college, youth. Can you talk a little about what that current state of sports in our industry looks like now, and how the priorities of mental health and just mental health performance can be absolutely necessary now at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, I've been coaching in the Little League space and witnessing this in flag football and tackle football and basketball. As a parent and as a coach, I've had these experiences where we're looking at kids who are 12 and under, and we're expecting them to act like they are teenagers or adults. And a lot of this has gotten very professionalized in terms of the structure and organization, the amount of time, money, and energy that's being committed. which is counterproductive in a lot of ways to what children actually need in these different developmental phases. So one of the big things we focus on in the education process is where your kid's at developmentally speaking, and how we build that healthy foundation of who they are versus what they do. And I think as I've watched kids at the lower levels of the youth sports space either have their entire identity tied to their good games or their bad games, or maybe they don't have the opportunity to get out there on the field and get the extra practice, and they think they're never going to be good at something. And we start to see kind of the mindsets that a lot of time and energy is spent once they get older trying to unpack why they're not confident or why they freeze up in a big moment. And a lot of these things stem back to these early childhood experiences, right? These core memories. And I think that's one of the areas where there's a lot of good people in the space, especially at the highest levels. This has become a major priority for organizations, colleges, high schools even, but really taking this down to the grassroots level and helping give parents and give coaches and give leaders with organizations a different perspective on how we support the growth of our kids, and when it's developmentally appropriate for us to come in and start to implement some of these things that are going to allow them to excel in terms of their skill development, knowing that a healthy foundation of who they are has already been built outside of just their performance on the field.
No, that's wonderful. I got to ask you, it seems like there has to be some real misperceptions, misconceptions people have related to the mental performance space. Can you talk about some of those that you maybe have seen or witnessed in some of your involvement?
Yeah, I think speaking in my own experience, right, I was kind of labeled early as one of the best players in the state, 9, 10 years old, and maintained that label all the way through high school. Was a first-round draft pick and made my major league debut at 20 years old. So the expectations, I don't think, could have been higher in terms of what my potential was. What I see is a lot of parents and a lot of coaches who are putting these labels on kids at 8, 9, 10, and 11 without recognizing a couple of things. One, they're not even through their formative identity formation phases. They're not through puberty, right? A lot of kids haven't even hit their growth spurts and where they're going to end up by senior year in high school or maybe 2 years in a college. And we're putting these labels and we're forcing kids into boxes and putting parents in a position where there's a fear of missing out or the fear of falling behind if they're not early specialization within a specific sport, if we're not pushing our kids into the private training at 8, 9, 10. Again, we can all agree reps are what is going to make all of us better at any skill we want to develop, but how we get those reps, how we frame the experience of work versus play, how we gamify this for kids to make it fun, to make them actually have the internal motivation to want to do it. And then ultimately, as they get older, teaching that discipline, because we all know motivation is only a temporary thing. Discipline is ultimately what's going to lead to that long-term success. But then asking ourselves that question, do our kids really want this? Or do we want this for our kids? And I think that's one of the big separations that we're trying to make is how do we give kids the space, but still have the boundaries that teach them the life lessons that we want sports to teach them. And oftentimes those teaching moments are ruined by kids or by parents or by coaches' emotions that they get in the way of the teaching moments. And I can say, as a dad and as a coach, I still struggle with these things, and it's really, really hard. And I think that's where we feel, parents are the most underserved people within this market of youth sports, and they're the most important people. They're the ones that drive the entire industry. But very few organizations are actually investing into parent education, knowing, that parents have that biggest impact on a child's development. So how can we bridge that gap between the culture of a program? What are the coaches telling the kids, and what are the parents telling the kids before the games and after the games that are really, creating the inner voice and that sense of self and what brings them love and what brings them safety?
Your background, your playing background, especially, being a first round draft pick out of high school by the Blue Jays, and just reaching the big leagues at such a tender age of 20 years old, and then really having that sort of can't miss prospect label on you, and being very advanced as a left-handed hitter, and not going on to play 8 seasons in the big leagues, and us having a chance to be together in Pittsburgh during your career as well. Can you talk a little about how these unique experiences and this journey has really put you in prepared you for the work you're doing right now and leading 3A athletics?
Yeah, I mean, I try and use my story, right, of what I experienced in youth sports and at the highest level to pull back some of the misconceptions that we have about what it takes to be great at something and then maintain that greatness. And I think that is something we see all the time, right at the highest level when we watch professional sports. Baseball especially is a game of failure. So we watch the best players in the world who, struggle to get a hit more than 2 or 3 times every 10 at bats. And somehow, some way, right, they cultivate that mindset of being able to do that in and day out over 162 games. I think ultimately what I experienced was being so good and not experiencing like real failure. I did have a panic attack on the mound when I was 11 years old in the Little League Western Regionals, which was kind of that level up, first time playing in front of thousands of people and being on the big stage. And, that's my body, that's my nervous system saying, hey, I'm not safe and I can't do this, right? So I shut down. I was able to kind of suppress that and just push through that through the next 10 years of my career. Getting drafted and being in the big leagues, it was me and Clayton Kershaw. And I always joke with parents or coaches when I talk to them, Clayton just retired last year. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I spent the last 6 years of my career trying to get back to the major leagues and then retired, 4 or 5 years ago. So it's like 2 completely different career trajectories, even though he and I were the 2 youngest players at 20 years old. And when I got sent down at 21, I wasn't ready for that. I had not had people in my life that really ever told me, I was ever not good enough to be on a team. And that shattered a deeper part of me, right? That it should have been like, hey, you're 21, go down to AAA, work on your swing, come back up here and just compete. We know you got it in you. I took that personally, right? And when I realized that there's more things in my life, my personal life, my experience with my family, some of the trauma that I experienced. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD after I was done playing. And that was one of those realizations for me is, we all have different stories. We all have different experiences. We all have different backgrounds that we come from. And we get put into a clubhouse or a locker room with, 25 to 30 other guys. And we just go out there and we compete at the highest level. But at the end of the day, we're all carrying something. And I think the more that we can start to mitigate some of those things that build into the core memory or the deeper belief about self, for me, it was dealing with abandonment issues early in my life that were showing up, right? The first time the organization sends me down to AAA, and it's like, this is way bigger deal in my head and my heart than it really should be. And I think that was something throughout my career, I really struggled to kind of get out of those cycles of the longer extended slumps and, just dealing with negative thoughts, and had a lot of great people, great coaches, mental skills people, sports psychologists around me to help me as much as they could. But there's deeper work that I needed to do. And I think for me to be in the position I am now leading this company and what we're trying to accomplish in the youth sports space, had I had that success, the expectations and the projections that everybody kind of around me and even internally I had for myself, I never would have had to face that music. I never would have had to do that deeper work. And so again, I think this is a part of a much bigger plan. It really is what it gives me the passion, the fuel to wake up every day and see, the goal is to impact 1 million lives, right? How many kids' trajectories within youth sports can we change because we help the parents and the coaches come alongside them and support them in a more developmentally appropriate way instead of just, well, this is the way I was coached or this is the way I was parent and I'm going to repeat this cycle with my kids.
Looking at this current, travel ball culture that we have now in our present state, that lends the parents, making extensive sacrifices, whether it's money, time, obviously just placing very high expectations on a child to perform at a high level at such a young age. It's, in some cases, you feel like the parents are trying to live their dreams through their kids. Can you talk a little about this culture and what you've seen and how this can be overcome to really make sure we can create realistic expectations and really positive outcomes down the road with these kids?
Yeah, I think to get the positive outcomes that we're looking for kids experiencing youth sports, it comes back to us. We're the adults, right? And we can teach kids mental skills. And I think there's great opportunities, right, as kids get older and they go through this process. But we also got to recognize kids are already overwhelmed, right? Parents are overwhelmed. Coaches are overwhelmed. Organizations are overwhelmed. There's just so much going on. Again, I always go back to child development, 8 to 12. What do kids 8 to 12 really need? Do they need to play in 15 tournaments? Probably not, right? Do people do this with what I believe are the best intentions for their kids' development? Probably so, right? I think 99% of us are out there trying to do what we feel like is right by our kids. But the way that the culture and the way the system has really progressed over the last 15, 20 years is we've taken a very fragile, for lack of a better term, a fragile developmental phase where within the right constraints, we can really teach about grit and how to work hard and how to push through and how to compete. But we're constantly putting them out there on this platform where they have to go and earn a $15 ring, right? And at the end of the week, are their parents posting a picture of them on social media because they won the tournament or because they won the MVP? And then what happens when little Timmy or little Susie doesn't have a good weekend and they're not on social media, right? So it's like, being a parent's hard. Being a parent in youth sports is extremely hard. And I think that's really where this passion lies for me. I am far from a perfect parent and a perfect coach, but I recognize that if we can collectively start to have these conversations, here locally, I have great relationships with a dozen of these select travel baseball organizations that I really do think have good people from the top down. I do think, systemically there's issues that we need to address. I think that's one of the things I love about being a part of the ABCA Youth Summit and youth committees is like, how are we starting to pull back the layers on what we as a company try and focus on are the root causes. And I think there are things like arm injuries and overuse injuries and things that are a product of, right, deeper issues within this space. So I don't stand here and claim that I have all the answers, but I am excited to be a part of those conversations and build the alliances with whether it's select baseball, softball, whatever sport organizations, and then organizations like the ABCA and MLB. And it's like, how can we get the right people sitting at the table to start to pull back the layers on what are the root causes here? And then how do we operate in this space while we put the children's best interest in mind, which I recognize there are businesses and there are, I run a for-profit business, so I'm not standing up here saying there's not an opportunity in this space for us to build things that generate revenue. But at the end of the day, our goal is impact and to change as many lives and then come alongside organizations and partner with organizations who feel like we can do better for the kids and are committed to kind of the long-term growth step by step.
Any final words that you would like to bring that just either talking further about your company, about the work you're doing, or just what you're seeing currently out there in this space and how you feel like you and your company can come in and help and hopefully maybe create some change?
Yeah, I mean, we partner with local little leagues. We have select travel baseball organizations. I think I mentioned, we want this to be across all sports. I think this applies in just about every sport that our kids are going through. I think as parents, right, coming together and talking about child development, a lot of us have kids and have no background, no experience, no understanding of how our kids develop. We're doing the best we can with what we got, right? And I don't ever want this to feel like I'm on some kind of pedestal or we're trying to put parents under the microscope and make people feel guilty. At the end of the day, I think the more that this conversation around mental health, around emotional development, intelligence, regulation, these things that are kind of secondary to skill development, right? Which we hear this all the time at the highest level, with whether it's a great coach or a great player, talk about the process and talk about the work and talk about the things. And it's like, how do we build kids up to that place where they take complete and full ownership over what they want to be and how they want to get there? And then we as the parents and the coaches are there to help support them and guide them. But ultimately, this has got to come from within. And I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions I see, is that you're going to manufacture this in your kid. And you may be able to manufacture this in your kid, but I'm willing to bet a lot of money that the damage that's going to be done long-term between you and your child, you may think it's worth it in your mind, but I try and encourage parents to think about the long-term. Think about when your kids start having kids and the way that they're going to parent their kids through youth sports and the coaching as well. And I think that's one of the most powerful things is growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. There are things coaches and parents did back then that we just can't accept, right, anymore. But I also think that the idea that we can't have tough love is one of those things I don't ever want to shy away from. But I think if we overlook, number one, what is the role of a parent versus what is a coach? And then if you are a coach, how do you build trust and connection with players to where you can coach them hard, right? So you can push them beyond what they think they're capable of doing. And when is it appropriate to do that, right, from a developmental standpoint? And then how do we build that trust and connection, which the best coaches we've ever played for are the ones that we know we could call at 2 a.m. if there was a real emergency and they're going to be there for you. And that's the type of person, right, that's going to be able to coach you in a different way than, Nick Saban talks about transformational versus transactional, right? There's a lot of transactional coaches out there, whether they're doing it consciously or subconsciously. And when you're transactional, kids pick up on that. And I think that we can argue about how this generation's different, but ultimately their emotional intelligence, or at least awareness, is much greater than we had, right? They have access to way more information than we ever did. So, speaking of, like, check out our website, 3athletics.com. We partner, like I said, with organizations. We have all kinds of resources and tools for parents, coaches, and for leadership teams within organizations, just to be able to look at this from a different lens. I think we're doing something that's different than most people are in this space. And like I said, I can teach kids how to hit and throw a baseball at the highest level, but my passion, my impact is from how do we connect with parents? How do we serve parents and coaches to help them be better prepared, right? To help their kids that they're coaching or parenting through this process grow up with a healthy relationship with the sport they play, but more importantly with themselves.